so. Thank you and welcome. Logging hell. My name is Thomas Klausner. I'm from Vienna, Austria, and while it's quite hot in here, it's not as hot as when we cycled from Passau to Frankfurt here. So, yeah. Okay, what is logging? I'm of course not talking about the thing lumberjacks do to trees. I'm talking about, is it too small or can you read it? Because that's not really my laptop, okay. I'm talking about logging as what we're doing in a software context, of course. Okay, what needs logging? There are a lot of short scripts that just run a very short time from the command line. They might not need logging. Sometimes say or warn is just enough. But a proper application will definitely need some kind of logging. And we're talking about something that uses some sort of web framework maybe, like Catalyst or Dancer or something like that. Uses maybe some kind of ORM, DBX class. Needs a bunch of cron jobs to operate, to do some daily maintenance scripts. Maybe needs some manual scripts to run from time to time to fix up something. Fix up scripts that maybe take a long time, you know. You have a bug in a database, fix it, script runs an hour. And you maybe need some additional daemons that run in the background and do some other stuff. So a lot of different components, and they all need to log stuff because you need to know what's happening. I've written a very small example application. It's a very small web app that takes an URL and grabs a screenshot. It also does thumbnails of the screenshots, and it draws some nice mosaics of all the thumbnails. I'm showing some code fragments from this application in this talk from time to time, but I'm not showing the whole application because it's not the theme of this talk. If you want more context, you can get it from here. It's on GitHub. It's called Webshop. You can try it on this laptop, also on my laptop. It should be running here. Maybe somebody who can post it to IRC then. Whatever. And there's a small profanity disclaimer. I'm going to mention a certain brand of beer from time to time. The name of the beer might be confusing to non-German speakers. So here's two important facts. There's hell. It's not a place of suffering and punishment in an afterlife. It's a very pale golden beer. Hell. Yeah, hell is beer. And then there's fucking, which is not a vulgar reference to the act of sexual intercourse, but of course a small village in Austria. And fucking hell is a beer dedicated to that village, which you can actually buy it. It's some So back to the logging hell. It seems so simple. You just want to know what some long-running program is doing. So you log something, but it's not that simple. It's fucking hell. For a start, log, for example, is a native Perl function that calculates the logarithm of something, which of course is the smallest problem in all of these hellish things you get to start when you think about it. Some of the things you might want to think about, where do you want to log to? Do you want to log to some standard place defined by your operating system, like var log something? Of course, there are several different standards, several different operating systems, so there is no standard. Do you want to log to some file or some directory in your application? Maybe you install it to opt your app and log there. Do you want, maybe you don't deploy your application, you just run it from a regular user account, so you do it in your home directory somewhere. But if you do that, how do you figure out your app base? How do you pass all this information around? Fucking hell. Do you want one log file per application? Do you want one file per important subsystem of your application? Like that, like for mail and different parts. If several different processes of your application log at the same time to the same file, how do you handle race conditions and stuff like that? Maybe it's better to log to a service like syslog, or into a database, or to all of the above. Fucking hell. Then there's this theme of log rotation. Do you want to rotate your log files by file size or by date or by both or something else? Do you want to compress and remove old log files after some time to save disk space? Should the logger class in your application itself rotate the log files, or an external thingy like log rotate? Maybe you need to restart the thing that's logging after rotating the log file because then the file handle is gone, and Oh, fucking hell. What about log levels? Do you need different log levels? Should messages below a certain log level be discarded? Should all messages of a given log level go to a distinct file? How do you define which log level you're currently running under? Do you need to change the log level while the program is running? Which standard of log levels to use? Because of course there are several. For example, from POSIX and log4j, they have different names, different numbers. Nice, for example, one has error and warning, and the other one uses error and warn. So they're not even short and long, it's just completely fucking hell. What about testing? During testing, do you want to make it easy for you to test the log messaging, the log messages you generate during testing? You want to test what you actually logged. What about sending alerts via SMS or on critical log messages as part of the advanced or strangely esoteric features? Should log messages go to your console window and to your log file? Should the log message report where it was generated in the application? Which is the format of the log message. You need timestamps, of course. What timestamps? Just seconds since the epoch, ISO something, or with, without time zone, with milliseconds, without milliseconds. You want a PID or not? Do you want a program name? Which program name? The whole path, just the name? Do you want more details where the message came from, like the module or the line number? Or do you want parsable logs, so you can actually run something over the log files to generate some statistics or find certain log messages, or maybe even regenerate data after it went bad? It's fucking hell. Do you want to use one of the 500 plus distributions on CPAN that have log in it? Okay, that's not all the log distributions, but you get the point. Do you want to write your own logger? I mean, because how hard could it be to push some messages to a file? It's easy, yeah. 501 distributions. Fucking hell. What about built-in logging tools of various frameworks? Everything has its own logging thing. Catalyst, Dancer, Mojo, Licious, Mojo, whatever. Can you reuse those for your non-web code? Because of course you have code that's not running in your web server. Do they interact with the other loggers that you maybe have? Now, do you need to also answer all of those questions for those loggers too? Fucking hell. What about other environments your code might run in? Like web servers from Apache, Starman, etc. They just capture standard out and log it, standard error and log it somewhere. But where? Daemon tools, that's the same. Cron jobs, they mail standard out and standard error to some place or not, who knows, because it's 10 more different places where you can configure what happens to your log output. Can you add logging to third-party code? For example, how do you log what's happening inside something like DBX class or LWP or some other modules you use from CPAN or some other place? Maybe do you want to add logging to something that you publish on CPAN? How do you do that? And even if you manage to answer most of these questions, congratulations, by the way, where do you put all those answers? How do you define sane logging? It's just fucking hell. So here are some of the things I tried in the last 10 years or so, with various success. Oh, sorry. The first thing of ages ago, just put some logging matches into a package and import a log function, maybe, or something like that. Very annoying. Or yeah, object orientation, put them into a class, get a logging object and pass that all around everywhere, very annoying. So put them in the class, get a logging object, store a logging object in some sort of handler object that you have, like catalyst $C, like the C log thing, also annoying. Put them in the class, get a singleton object, or maybe put them in a role, because roles are so cool, everybody has to use roles now, so just make a logging role. Oh, it's all fucking hell. Actually, the sanest option of all of those is the singleton. That's actually the nicest thing, which of course is just to disguise global values, and they told you to never use global values, but that's actually a good use case. Because, yeah, logging is really a good use case for using singletons. And you can find a very sane implementation of all of that in a distribution CPAN called log_any by Jonathan Schwartz, or Swartz, whatever. It actually consists of two parts, log_any and log_any adapter, just straight from the documentation from the CPAN thing. Log_any allows CPAN modules to safely and efficiently log messages. by letting the application choose, or the client to choose, a logging mechanism. We're going to look into that. So you use log any in your modules that might want to log something, and you use log any adapter in your program, scripts, daemons, or whatever, to define what this script or daemon or whatever wants to happen with stuff that gets logged in some of those modules. Okay, you can read it. So this is one of the examples from the application. We have a class called snapshot thumbnail that just generates thumbnails out of stuff from a database. It has two methods. One works on a result set, fetches some stuff, and then uses another method which just thumbnails a single item, does some imager thingies. That's just boring. The point is there's no reporting, you don't know what's happening. So let's add some logging to that. So the first thing is we use log any and import this $log thing. Of course, you can name that the way you want, but log is the most sensible thing. And now you have this log singleton, and you can call it some places and log stuff. And it even has sprintf style logging things. So you can either use log info, then it's just a string, or you can use log info f, which is a little bit hard to pronounce, but. And then you can use sprintf style stuff, which makes it very nice to, you don't have to concatenate all the messages all the time, just use sprintf, it's nicer. Some more log messages, different log levels, info, error, just what you expect from a logging thing. This is now a script class that I usually, okay, that's the class that actually uses the thing. It just grabs some things from the database and then generates this snapshot thumbnail object, which was I showed you earlier, and does some stuff on it. And this is the actual script that you run, which is basically empty, because that's the way you should do scripts. The scripts are empty, you implement everything the script does in a class, and then the script just calls the class and off you go. Because that way, for example, you can use music, get-opt, and other nice things. So now if we run that, what kind of log output would we get? Nothing. Because we didn't define, because we didn't define any adapter. So we just used the log method to log stuff, but we did not specify any adapter. And by default, we get the log any adapter null, which just discards all log messages. So the key point here is that you can add as much logging do you want as all of your modules. You can even put them on cpan, and log any has very little dependencies, I think none actually. And then you have logging in all of your modules. You can add them to your schema classes, to your controller classes, to other helper classes, to everything. It doesn't really matter. You don't have to carry objects around or have some configuration at the end. And if and what kind of logging actually happens is up to the guy or to the person who actually uses your module. So let's take a look at that, log any adapter. You just use the module, then you initiate some sort of log object any way you want. And then you call log any adapter set and pass in the log object. And from now on, in this program, every time you call log something, it will be logged via whatever log class you're using. So here's how we added that to this script. Just use log any adapter. Here use log dispatch for a short example. Generate a new log dispatch object and pass it to log any adapter. Here's some hateful config for log dispatch. For example, a hard-coded log file name. It's really disgusting and ugly as shit. You also have to fiddle with the permissions, because this is in var log, so it's only writable by root usually, but then maybe you have a cron job that runs with another user, or you, as a regular user, run some fix-up script, or the web server runs as no user. So you have to fiddle with the permissions. Fucking hell. For some reasons, log dispatch doesn't add new lines to the log messages, so you have to specify that, and you also have to. The default mode is not append, but just write. So every time you start a new script, you overwrite your log files. Whatever. So now when we run the script, we get some output in the log file, blah, blah, blah. Of course, this output sucks because we haven't configured log dispatch properly yet, but fucking hell. But that's enough for now. And we want to, because now we want to enable logging in Catalyst controller in a completely other part of the application. Here's a controller action, for example, that presents the user short form. And after the user submitted the URL, it grabs a screenshot from the URL using GTK3 WebKit, which is very nice. Thanks to Emmanuel Rodriguez, who showed us the code on the last Austrian Perl workshop, Twin City Perl workshop. It's very cool for headless browsing, scripted browsing. Check it out. Anyway, so here's some Catalyst controller thingy. That's the interesting part of the controller. Grab some URL from a HTML form handler field, get the screenshot, and then stuff it in the database and redirect to some other action. Just run-of-the-mill Catalyst code. Now Catalyst has its own logger clog, so we could try that. We just sprinkle some clog blah 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 messages in between. Where will those log messages go to? Who knows? Standard error per default, depending on what web server you're using. It might go to some other places. Or not. Fucking hell. Of course, you can also put your own logging object into clog. So in your basic Catalyst application class, your top-level Catalyst thing, for example, here you have the same log dispatch thing shit as earlier, but now we pass it to the log thing of Catalyst. So now every time we now call clog, we're not using the Catalyst log class, but log dispatch as we configured it here. So now the messages go to var log webshot.log, but there's a major annoyance here. If you use Catalyst debug mode, your log file will be flooded with all of the Catalyst debug crap, like that, and good luck finding your proper log messages in there. Yeah, somewhere around here. No, here, whatever. It's just annoying. So my advice here is never mess with clog. Just the same probably is true for other embedded logging frameworks, I don't know. Just use log any to log whatever you want to log and keep clog for Catalyst to log its stuff that you probably don't care about anyway. So now let's do the same thing with the log dispatch and log any adapter. Load up, here's the interesting thing. And then we can use just $log info. And now Catalyst debug doesn't interfere with our custom logging because Catalyst debug logs still go to standard error, totally independent of whatever our logging class wants. And that stuff goes to the logs. Yeah, of course, now we have a lot of code repeated. To fix this, I usually set up one special class per application, which sets up the logger and uses log any adapter to store it. I usually call that something like webshot init logger or whatever. It's basically just the same code you've seen earlier. It uses log any adapter, log dispatch, configuration, set log any adapter, blah, blah, blah. But now we can replace all of this code in the controller, for example, with that. Just load the init logger, which in the background then sets up the logging object and everything. And then use log any $log to actually get the logging object back from whatever you choose it to be. And now we can happily log happily ever after. So now that we have a central place to define how we can log, we can use it everywhere, of course. We can also replace other instances where we now use different logging classes and stuff like that. So in the script I showed you earlier, we can replace all of that with this. Yay, let's code. So and anywhere we want some logging, we can just add those two lines and immediately have whatever logging interface we want at our disposal, and you can just log blah in all classes. That's very nice. So now we have a few answers to some of the countless questions I asked earlier. Just create one class that sets up logging the way you like it. Use log any and log any adapter to pass your log object around. And now let's take a short and slightly biased look at what CPAN has to offer to answer the rest of the questions. There are two major logging frameworks on CPAN, log4Perl and log dispatch. There are lots of smaller solutions, which I choose to ignore. And then there's syslog, which I like a lot. I will try to set up each of those three containers now, log for Perl, log dispatch, and syslog. And here are the requirements. All log messages should go to a file. Each message should contain the timestamp, PID, and the name of the program it came from. That's not going to work. And when a module is used from a script via the command line, the output should also go to the console window. So you can just see it and don't have to go to the log file to figure out what's happening. And when the module is used in tests, we want some easy way to test what the logging, what was logged. So log for Perl by Mike Sheely and Kevin Gross. It's a port of log4j, a Java-based logging utility thing. It's very powerful, has lots of features, of course, lots of stuff to configure. It's slightly cryptic and very Java-ish, so I don't really like it. And log for Perl is very config file centric. Because a key feature of log for Perl is that you can reload basically your whole logging thing during the runtime of the program by changing the configuration and then rereading the configuration. For example, you can change logging levels in a running process and, oh, there's a problem with the program, so go to a finer logging level to see more output. So here's a very simple config file that meets some of the requirements. The first thing you have to do is to find some sort of default web namespace, the basic category, basically. I mean, you could also root or whatever. We want to log everything with a log level debug, so basically all log messages should be logged. Then we define a so-called appender called log file, which is now further configured down here. We want to use what's called log for Perl appender file, so just stuff it into a file, into that file. Again, the hard-coded path in here. And use this format to format the log message, which basically is timestamp, place it came from, PID, message, new line. Then we have another appender called screen, and this should go to the console via the appender screen module, and it should use some simple layout that's predefined. So now we get nice messages logged to the log file with the timestamp, where it came from, the PID, and the actual message. And we get some output to the console, which looks a little bit different because it's using this simple layout. Of course, there are some issues. For example, we don't know which program generated the log message. We only know which module generated the log message. But if 10 programs use the same module, it's not very helpful to figure out, to see which module the log message came from. We always log to the console in this configuration. And we're not handling logging during tests. So, but unfortunately, log for Perl is very hard to configure dynamically. I mean, it's just insane. There is some documentation, but we can work around it using log any. For example, in init logger, in this central logging class thingy, we use IO interactive, which provides the isInteractive method or function or whatever. And so if isInteractive returns true, which is only the case if we are connected to a console thingy, we use that configuration. And if we are not connected, we use another configuration that just doesn't include the screen configuration. So it's just, we ditch the whole issue of dynamically configuring log for Perl by using different config files. Because it's much easier that way. So what about testing? There is something called this log for Perl appender test buffer, but it seems to be only used for internal testing. At least that's what the documentation says, so I didn't take a look at that. Because we can use log any test, which is a very great part of log any. Here that's just a similar init logger thingy. We check for harness active, which is always true if you're running under test harness or proof. So you can use that to have different stuff if you're running under tests. And if you're running under the tests, we use log any adapter test, which is a special adapter, which works like that. In your test, you use log any test. It's important that you use that before you actually use this line. Then you run some code that logs some output, and then now you can later ask the log object contains something. And there are several other methods to check the contents of the log messages and stuff. It's very nice, and it's actually very easy to test if you're getting the correct logging output. We can use the same techniques for all of the other loggers, so I'm not going to show them for the other loggers, it's just the same. Just use log any test, and this test env harness thing works very well. So the nice parts about log4perl is you can configure different behaviors for different subsystems. You can change the configuration on the fly. For example, turn debug on only for some stuff in some defined namespace, and keep the rest running on info level or stuff like that. The fucking hell part is the dynamic configuration is possible but very inconvenient. It's very big, does a lot of things. The config syntax is very unperlish. For example, you have to define the namespaces. You have to. It's not webshot : something. It's webshot ... And then there's this issue of how do you actually find the config file? Yeah. Because either you hard code the config file path in this init class thing, or you have to go through various hoops to figure out where you actually are and where the config file is located that you want to do. Yeah. Then there's another thing called log dispatch by Dave Holsky. We've already seen some basic configurations of log dispatch. We expand them now a bit. For example, there's this thing called callbacks, which you can use to format, reformat, or ignore, or somehow other mangle the log messages. You can just pass it a list of subroutines, and then you get a hash of the message and the log level, and then you can do some stuff with it. Here we just use printf to get the local time, the PID, and the program name, and the actual message, and pass it to the logging thingy. Again, if you're running interactively, now it's a little bit easier to do dynamic stuff. You can just get the log object and add another dispatching class to it, which could have completely different formats for the layout and stuff like that. So here's the output of the log file. Again, we get the timestamp. Now actually the name of the script we are running, the PID, and the message. And we get exactly the same output in the console window. So the nice thing about log dispatch is much more Perlish than log4perl. It had lots of output options. There are, I think, 68 or something different modules that you can dispatch the log messages to. The default log messages are really ugly. That's really annoying. And so you have to do a lot of formatting stuff for all of the log messages. But it's quite nice. I mean, I like it more than log4perl. But that's I like best, syslog. Syslog was developed in the 80s for sendmail, actually. It's, of course, mainly a Unix tool, but some clones are available for other operating systems, or I think it's a BSD tool, actually, sorry. And it provides a centralized system-wide logging infrastructure, and here's how to use it. It's very, very low level, this thing here, because it's using Unix syslog. You need to import some constants, which might not be very portable. And then if you're running interactively, we use this thing, which are some strange mythic constants exported by Unix syslog. Don't ask, because you actually have to read the header files of syslog on your system to figure out what's available on your system. So it's rather low level. Then we just set the log any adapter, the correct one, with the options, and then we have to define a facility. Here we use local 1. Syslog defines some global facilities where you want to log to, like kernel, mail, or daemons, which are used by your operating system if you're using Linux, for example. And it has 8 slots for some private usages called local 1 to local 8. So there's one thing you have to do. We have to tell syslog where local 1 should go to, and as I'm using rsyslog, I have to edit etc. rsyslog.conf, which again is a global configuration file, but at least it's in a centralized place, and your system just uses it anyway, so it's there and it has a defined location. The file is, of course, rather cryptic. You can define some sort of message formats. There's one called traditional file format and some other ones. You can define your own formats in an annoying syntax. And then you can define where you want the log messages to go. For example, here we say info should go here, 1 here, and this here, the star captures everything and just puts it into debug. But one really killer feature of syslog is that, and other clones, is that you can forward all log messages to a central other logging server. So you can have 10 machines and all log locally and then forward the log messages to one central server and use that for further analysis and stuff like that. So let's just take a look at the local output at the moment. We again get the timestamp, the name of the machine, the file name, PID, and message. So nice parts about syslog, it's well-tested, stable, performant tool used by millions of systems. I think every Linux-based system uses some sort of syslog clone. It's got a very small Perl footprint because it's not in Perl. It's just the Perl part is very small. It's just forwarded to this syslog daemon and that's it. So you're not adding tons of memory to your code. You do not need to mess with log file permissions and everything because it's handled by the system. It plays very well with log rotate. And it's got a central system-wide configuration, which of course is also a downside because it's can be quite annoying to have it on different machines. You actually have to have root to configure it, and it's very Unix specific and not very portable. I think there are clones available for Windows, but I think you have to pay for them. I mean, okay, who uses Windows anyway? And there are only 8 local facilities. So if you're having one server which has a lot of different completely distinct different services on it, you maybe get problems with the facilities. You could still only all log them to one facility, forward them to another host, and then do some filtering on some other machines. Yeah, whatever. And there's no log level cutoff, so everything gets logged all the time. The other log messages, logging frameworks, which have this thing where say I have log level info, so everything below log level info won't get logged at all. It has? Yeah. Yeah, but not the Unix syslog thing, I think. Okay. Okay. Which one is yours? Okay. Okay. The syslog itself, the header files. Okay. 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 The question is that he says that yeah, you can configure it in syslog that you want some levels cut off and some not, but you cannot configure it in Perl.
Okay.
Yeah, the log any adapter syslog doesn't has a way to define if log level is this, don't log it. Yeah, because that's what syslog should do.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. There's one thing called message passing. It's maybe the next big thing. I don't know. Thomas Doran has a talk about it today at 2:30, and there's another talk about it tomorrow by Damien called Easy Logging. So yeah, this is my summary. You can use log any in your models to log stuff, use log any adapter in your programs to define how you want stuff logged. Use syslog, unless you prefer something else. I don't know what the time frame is actually at the moment. Ah, okay. 4 minutes late, but I started late, or? It says 7 minutes on my thingy here. Anyway, I've got some bonus slides. When you use log debug, actually I don't use it that often. Using sprinkle log debug messages in all your code and then not logging them. I prefer to just use one, and I remove them after the bug is squashed or the feature is developed. Because I think littering your code with lots of log debug this, log debug that messages is just clutter and distracts from the program flow. Sometimes I still use it, mainly when I develop a new feature that needs to run for a very long time, like hours and days, and I don't want to sit in front of the terminal all the time, watch the output, just run it, and check back later on the logging output. Or when I fix a bug that only happens, if some certain user enters some certain data and you don't really know it, and it just, yeah. But the user cannot communicate. I still tend to remove them after some time because if I ever need them, I can get them from version control. Log levels and suppressing of messages. Log for Perl goes through a lot of effort to define which messages to display, where and when. For example, that's the thing I showed you earlier. Now we're just using 1, so now everything below 1 won't get logged. And then you can add another thing like another category, webshot web controller. So everything that's logged inside this namespace will be logged with debug log level. And you could add that on the fly and then have log for Perl reinitiate itself. Sorry?
I don't know
If you can edit on the front, I don't know.
No, otherwise, the debug inherits and it will be locked, some things will be locked twice.
Okay, yeah, okay, that's true. I think that syntax will probably have messages locked twice, once here and then another one another time here.
That's not really the problem. I can show you an example.
Okay, I don't know. I don't care for log purple anyway. It's just for the completeness. But okay. Anything? I still think it's a wasted effort to go through all of those efforts to have all of those different things because I prefer to have one log file per log level, and then the disk space that the log messages maybe take isn't really an issue anymore, and you can set up log rotate to compress, and then you can filter later anyway. So my advice is to log everything and filter later. The message format, I've been to a little bit of it. It has to contain a timestamp, PID, and for some complex things, some sort of identifier is quite helpful. At least the name of the thing that's logging, maybe some object IDs, so you can grab through the log files and just find the relevant lines in your log. For example, if you have something like that in your log file, you can just grab the file and only output this job. Log dispatchuli has a nice feature called logger prefix. Log dispatchuli is a simple wrapper around log dispatch by Ricardo Signes. You can say set prefix something and then just log messages, and you get those things prepended to all log messages. So if your code is distributed to a lot of different places, you can just say, okay, from now on I want to log this prefix. Yeah, it's quite nice, but it's missing in log any. Log purple has a similar feature called nested diagnostic context, which you enable like this. You can push some stuff on it and then log something and then get stuff like that. That's just from the documentation of the module. If you enable it in your output formats, and there's also something called map diagnostic context where you can store key value pairs. So it's really, yeah, you can use it for a lot of stuff. Log rotation, doing the log rotation directly in your logging framework, like log dispatch, for example, feels just wrong to me. You have the overhead of checking the time or the size of the thing all the times, and then you have the issues with file permissions and stuff like that. Then maybe some user has to wait a little bit longer because he happens to hit the request where the log rotation happens. So this is why I prefer syslog and log rotate, because there's just external tools that work and do that job. Multiple outputs. Yeah, we've seen that logging to the consoler and to the file. Log dispatch has a lot of different output classes. I just counted 70 or something using that thing. But I never used any of those, and I don't think it's really that important that the logging framework sends SMSs on a critical message or stuff like that. My feeling that's a job for Nagios or some other monitoring framework. Depends. Yeah, it depends. That's my opinion. Is it doesn't really. And in the end, you could configure syslog to notify you. Forcing loggers into CPAN models, that's a funny thing that Stephen here, Hirayanto, Japanese guy, or no, don't know where he's from. He basically sort of monkey patched log any into some CPAN modules. There's log any for DBI and log any for LWP. I haven't used them yet, but they look quite interesting and fun. You can say use DBI and then use log any for DBI. And then from now on, all DBI calls will be logged using log any. It's not the same as DBI trace or something like that.
Martin Evans, one of the DBI developers, has DBIX log for.
Yeah, yeah, that's similar.
You know, is one of the DBI developers, and he has built something similar. I think you know what he does.
Okay. Yeah, and you get some output. DBIC trace, that's the last thing. Sometimes you need to know what DBI trace is doing, so you can have this tracing thing where you just turn on debug mode and then do some stuff. And then you get output like this, but you only get it to standard error, and I haven't figured out yet how to get it to logs, but maybe what you suggested would help, or that help.
He wanted the DBI developers.
Yeah. Okay, with DBIX, okay.
Or I'm stuck.
Okay. Yeah, but I haven't figured out how to use that
You probably
with...
know DVD Oracle or DVD ODBC.
Okay,
That's the guy.
okay. And that's just a small, nice tip I discovered recently. If you set this thing here, DBIC trace profile console, you even get proper SQL statements from DBIC trace, DBIC trace, even in color, something that where you can just use them and copy them into your SQL thing. So that's it. Any more questions? Okay. There's one more, sorry. Yeah.
Configuring this log to log into a remote system is specific?
No.
No,
Yeah.
it's not. And from my experience, the local facilities doesn't really matter because you always can filter on a program ID and log to separate files. So this is not really a limitation.
Yeah. Okay.
One more answer.
Yeah. So the. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Some ugly limitations.
Okay.